Hi everyone, welcome back. Today let me get an idea into a great foggy scene and the evening in acrylic painting. I take one idea to make that is going to create a background, middle ground and foreground along with elements and foggy layers step by step. I present a painting in a foggy scene with acrylic unique techniques, primarily challenging mediums and the subtle nature of atmospheric. And see our recurring materials here, and this the 10 by 12 canvas board. And next the three small size mob brushes, and another one here the one big size mob brushes, and this the fill bed brush and liner number 2. And let me go. First, here I am moistening my palette. This will help to paint moist. Needing paint, permanent yellow tip, permanent rose, portrait pink, Naples yellow hue, cobalt teal and titanium white. For our sky background, first here the sky background and the distance element to the horizon line are going to come inside this first line. That I can mark inside this second line comes the middle ground, and within this we are going to highlight the elements along with fog. In the rest of this section is foreground that we are going to highlight and deposit the fog effect as the grass too. Now I have three small mob brushes to create the sky background, and if you want, if you can use the filbert brush too, can be used instead of this. Here I am mixing some Naples yellow hue with titanium white by my palette knife. This is the great foggy scene piece, so we need to add more white to all the colors. After blending well, I take my small mob brush and load the paint with that to continue. I paint the glowing of sun's background first by circular motion. This is the first layer. Next, for the second layer takes some orange, some permanent rose and yellow, mixing it well together with already mixed with the previous color, and next to add some white color, this color and mixing well by palette knife. Now load the paint with my brush and coming more around in a circular motion, add this color next to the existing color. No need to ask details, just look hard coming the circular motion, extreme the left corner of the canvas and right corner of the canvas, then bottom of the horizontal line, just the colors showed then merged. Using my brush for blending, wet on wet, gently blend wet edges together lightly, circular motion brush strokes. While they are still wet, using light pressure for subtle blend and little more pressure for dramatic blending and distant strokes. Dry brush blending. Important to keep mop brushes dry, and once applying color, then lightly drag the dry mop brush with lesion pressure to soften any harsh lines. Don't leave it layer by layer. Next we are going to make the third layer, picking some cobalt teal, mixing well with titanium white and apply top of the canvas, just blending the colors together gently, slowly, just blending the colors together before drying the paint, just till the paint is wet, so complete your blending within wet. Few points I am going to share here when creating a foggy misty effect with acrylic paint. Always avoid to applying paint too thickly. If you apply thick layers, there is a lack of luminous when see-through quality of fog. So make sure that try to build up the layers effect through multiple thin scumbling layers. When you establish fog layers and the elements of background, letting each dry completely before adding the next one. Second one, don't let the fog to hide the image of the elements. That always should be the transparent. Fog break the illusion and naturally blur the silhouettes. So try to sharp the distant edges, sharp the elements, edges of the elements softly blend out. The third one, avoid to use more water along with paint. During creating a fog colors or layer, make it more like watercolor. If use more water that lead to a weak finish, make sure that smoother, more stable, transparent layer. The fourth one, avoid to adding wet paint over the layer, so the drying processing is very important. The fifth one, try to use softer brushes, better for smooth blending and subtle transition. A very good atmospheric effect. The sixth one, fog is very light, but without some contrast and deeper values, the painting can look unintentional. If the lack of contrast and sharp details in the background, dip or very diluted paint mixture, gently, slowly scrub the brush onto the canvas here. The smoke should be very light circular that go upwards through smoke effect. Now I am adding Naples logo in the center for creating glowing sun, and just spread the color with my finger and gently and rub the paint into each other for merging. Secret to the compelling foggy scene is layering. Ensure there is elements are dry before moving on to the next step. Now to create our bright sun, just using palette knife and take little bit of white just to keep the paint in the center, that using the brush just spread it for little more glowing around the sun. Finally, using my finger, take little bit of white and just dabbing it around here to create our beautiful glowing sun. Next step, we are going to create distance trees and the horizontal line too, using some sap green, mixing with a little permanent rose and some white. White is more essential for this painting. Green also in the range of value. Load the paint with our small mop brush, just creating the distance elements for our trees and land. Using various bristles brushes, and we are using them creating for our painting trees. Here I am using a soft dry mop brush and applying fog effect to creating the distance land and grass effect too. I am making here lots of small tabbing, no need to more details and substance in this. This distance element should be muted and light on value. Always mix our background colors with plenty of titanium white and a cool tone to make appear faded. Here using the liner brush number 2 and creating the trunk of the tree too. There is a tree should be blend seamlessly into the sky on our horizontal line. Just using the same line brush soft and highlighting the top edges of these trees, just to keep the details minimal and the edges soft. Always ensure that base layer is completely dry before applying the fog wash. Mixing the fog wash should be thin and semi-transparent, and be thin and semi-transparent. Make sure test it on a separate surface to ensure the underlayer can still see through it. I'm going to apply the initial fog layer, so just leave this background completely dry. After completely drying this background, now picking some titanium white and very tiny bit of black, mixing well with water. Just mix very thin translucent wash of white paint with water using a flipper brush size 18, and just apply this thin transparent paint in light horizontal strokes over these lower sections of these distance trees. This is the base layer of mist. Just vary the pressure to create an uneven natural look of foggies swirling and depositing. Once completing this, and next going to concentrate introduce our middle ground elements. Mixing of the fog wash, mixing some white acrylic with very little bit of black, mixing well, then adding the water ratio paint 1:water 5. So 1:5 ratio for waterly fog wash. The goal is a waterly, so a vacuum wash, or you can use a glazing medium. but here I am not using the glazing medium, I am using water leaf fogwash. Now for creating our middle ground elements, now I am using Viridian Hue and sap green, mixing well together and load the paint with my small mob brush, keeping here lots of taping to create the middle ground. Gradually use the colors with a slightly more saturation and darker values than the background elements. So here I am using more dark green. Next, I am going to paint more trees left side of this mid ground. So I am using some black and permanent rose, mixing well together. Then load the paint with my liner brush too, and just creating the 4 trunk of trees first. The trees and creating the branches are very directions, and creating the very tiny branches too around here. Next, make leaves on all the branches. Here tops of these bright be clearer. Once completing this, and leave this background completely dry. The first layer of the fog, here I am using this brush and wipe this wash horizontally across the canvas over the first layer of elements. Making the elements, the mountains or trees appear recede into the mist. Here too I am going to create the second layer of fog layer once completely drying this background, and just am using the big size of my brush to do gently circular motion strokes where the trees meet the fog layer. This fades the base of the tree into the mist. Just the top of these trees might be clearer while the bottoms become absorbed by the fog layer. When we are coming to paint middle ground and foreground elements, and each subsequent layer with progression you paint should be a slightly larger, slightly darker and more detailed than before. Once completing this, next we are going to create the foreground. Now establish the foreground details. Same Viridian Hue and sap green. Continue lots of taping to create the foreground elements of grass by using small mob brush. Here no need horse details. Foreground elements should have the most details. So now positional slightly lower on the canvas. This is closer to the viewer. Make sure that each layer of trees is dry before applying the next fog wash. Always final layer should be contrast and focus when we paint the foreground trees by using our darkest mixture than before. There should be the largest and darkest elements in our painting. Creating our big tree here, just to start to create the trunk of the trees and the very directions, and just to drag from top downward slowly, then creating the small branches both sides of the directions. The bottom of the trunk should have the little more thicker. Once completing to creating the branches and trunk of the trees, now concentrate to creating the and establish the foliage on the branches. Focus these techniques between tree trunks and near the ground. Emphasize the depth, and foreground trees should have the most detail, sharpest edges and more darkest values to create contrast. Compare then midground and background elements. Just pull the eye background. The seventh one, plain composition. Establish a depth and mixing of colors. First paint the background and elements that detail hills and trees, whatever it may be. Next apply the misty layers that instantly push the elements further back into the fog. Next, establish the middle ground and foreground elements. Increased and establish the detail. Gradually paint the elements closer to the viewer. Increase the clarity of elements and the color saturations. Make sure that is the contrast. Next, make the fog layers and elements that meet the fog layer. Adding final details and highlighting, consider the light source using the soft highlighting where the light source might penetrate the mist and the cooler tones for shadows, depth of our painting. Giving the details in branches and leaves, texture of leaves using dabbing touch and dark green onto their leaves to give them more dimension. Once finishing our elements, now encase the fog with dry brushing. Once this layer underneath dry completely well before apply fog effect on it. Just do gentle and circular strokes where the tree meets the fog layers, here making the denser fog effect. Always it in small circular motion over a completely dry background. Always creating the fog effect at a completely dry background. Just build the fog in thin successive layers, allowing each to dry before adding the next. Elements 1. This creating the foggy scenes. Elements in the distance should be lighter value, cooler in cooler, and have softer, less defined edges. Always ensure that the first layer of trees or elements in every section is dry well completely before adding fog layer. When repeatedly adding layers, once the fog layer is dry, repeat these steps within the new layers of trees with each subsequent layers. Make the trees slightly larger, clearer, and the little darker in a value to create the atmospheric depth. Always we focus the foreground needs more prominent depth of colors and sharper edges compared to the distant softer elements. Add the foreground details after dry well completely, background foggy effect. Just highlighting more brightest foliage in these areas. This foliage should have the most details, sharpest edge. The tops of the foliage might be clearer. According to the weavers, the atmospheric depth creating any kind of elements away appear lights, less saturated and less detailed because the great foggy piece due to the air and moisture of fog between the elements and the weaver. This is the great foggy scene piece, so effect medium look like transparency. The goal is to make it thin and translucent, not opaque. Adding final detail and very subtle wash of the watery fog. Wash around the base of the trees and near the ground to make it everything together. Applying light pressure while creating our painting. When we build up the fog layer gradually by using a dry brush or scumbling techniques, no need harsh details. Just lessen pressure and gently apply the paint to the canvas to creating fog layer by using small light circular motion or horizontal strokes.